Free agency, it is upon us, ladies and gentlemen. This is officially, at least in my eyes, the beginning of the ramp up on the off season towards fantasy draft season. Again, leagues will open probably in that second week of August, if the last couple of years are any indicator. So we're basically about a month away from being able to do some legitimate fantasy basketball. Let's look at what we got going on kind of stuff. And the nice thing is, in the meantime, we got real stuff to talk about. Today, we're going to break down 5 of the most interesting developments during the free agency moratorium period so far. Not all of them are free agent signings. Some of them are trades, as those that are watching on YouTube can see on your screen right now. And the first one we're going to talk about here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball with, again, I'm Dan Vespris. And you obviously are remembering to hit like and subscribe as you settle in, right? You did it? We just have Shams Charania tweets on the board all the time now. It was nice back in the old days when we could flip back and forth between Woj tweets and Shams tweets. Now I can just scroll through one Twitter bar, and that pretty much does the whole thing. Breaking. It's not breaking anymore by the time we're talking about it, but it was at the time. The Denver Nuggets are trading Michael Porter Jr. and an unprotected 2032, which I know there's something mentally exhausting about keeping track of how far ahead some of these picks are. But like, I'm fully aware that 3 years ago, teams were trading 2029 picks, but there was something different about how it now is bouncing into kind of like deep into another decade. Anyway, unprotected 2032 first rounder to the Nets for Cam Johnson. So I was out yesterday. My son, my older son, Asher, is on a summer baseball all-star team. And first of all, it's a lot of fun. So I don't want to get into that part. But it is a massive time commitment, fun or not. And we're gone most weekends during the summer. I mean, we sleep at home, but we're gone almost all day. And then there's practices almost all the time. So yesterday in the afternoon, I went to get my kid from summer camp with one of his buddies. They came back here. They had a snack. And then we were gone. We went to camp. We went to practice for 2.5 hours. Some of the members on the team got dinner together. And someone came up to me. And I was like, oh, my God, free agency's been going for 3 hours. And I haven't even checked my phone. And I said, what's the biggest thing you've seen so far? And they said, Nuggets traded Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson. I said, they swapped the same guy? Because my initial feeling on this is from a reality standpoint, there are some subtle differences between the two guys. But from a fantasy standpoint, they're almost as close as you can get. Michael Porter, 18 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.6 steals, half a block, 50-77 were the splits, 2.5 3-pointers a game. Cam Johnson was a little bit ahead of him in fantasy at 18.8 points per game, separated by, 0.6 in that elusive category. 2.8 3-pointers, so Cam Johnson had him by a little bit there. I know, blowing him out of the water. MPJ had better rebounding numbers. Cam Johnson about 1 more assist per game, slightly lower field goal, higher free throw. Neither one of them was a big defensive stats guy. So fantasy-wise, very little changes putting one guy in the other one's place, other than, you can look at MPJ, who took 13.6 shots per game. Cam Johnson took 13 shots per game. And you can say, well, if the role pretty much just gets filled, like Cam Johnson drops into Michael Porter Jr.'s spot, I don't think he'll be as aggressive offensively as MPJ was, because this was the team that he came up with. This is where he felt comfortable. And Cam Johnson's going to come into a new place where, I don't know, you're going to say that he's not going to feel comfortable, because eventually he will, but he's going to go, I'm, 4th in the pecking order. I'm pretty far down the board, where Michael Porter was like, okay, fine, I will defer to Jokic, but I want to be next. Sorry, Jamal Murray. I'm going to take some of your stuff. Cam Johnson's not going to do that. And Cam Johnson might defer to Aaron Gordon along the way as well. So I think from just a straight value standpoint, you're probably looking at Cam Johnson taking a production per minute hit this coming year. It's possible that his field goal percent goes up, because everybody's does when they play alongside Jokic. But do I think he's going to get 13 shots in 32 minutes a game? Probably not. Do I think it's going to be a substantial drop-off? Also probably not, because Michael Porter played 34 minutes. Do we think Cam might add an extra minute and a half per game this year? I think that's conceivable if he just sort of slots into that pocket that Michael Porter left high and dry. But even if you add another minute and a half per game, that might just keep him close to 13 shots as opposed to seeing some sort of small drop-off. It does make Cam Johnson a much safer late season play because now he's not going to be on a tanking team anymore. And your only fear is, do the Nuggets have a robust enough regular season? And they've made a couple of other ads in free agency already where they now kind of separate themselves near the top of the pack and could potentially rest a guy. Maybe, but it's never going to be as significant as the rest you might give a player if you're attempting to lose ball games. I want to talk a little bit more about this particular deal because I do think that it's certainly one of the biggest things that's happened in fantasy, and we should stack our names up properly. But first, Bet Online is a proud partner of us here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball and your number one source for all sports betting action. Baseball is in full swing. Football right around the corner. Bet Online has UFC, tennis. We already talked NFL futures. They got soccer. That's always seemingly going on right now. FIBA is going on. The under-19 World Championships are happening as we speak. The AmeriCup over on the women's side. Soccer friendlies, mentioned soccer, that's also out there. There's always something you can do over at Bet Online, including live in-game betting on all the stuff that we've been talking about. And that is for the true maniacs out there. And I know you guys are those true maniacs. In between games, as if there was actually a break between them, you can head to the Bet Online casino with all the top Vegas style action, including poker, a live casino, blackjack, and so much more. Head to Bet Online today. Sign up, get going, and then you can take advantage of the industry-leading VIP Bet Online program with level-up bonuses, weekly cash boosts. That's the best. Bet Online, the game starts here. If you're trying to think about this from a team standpoint, Michael Porter Jr. is owed $38 million this year and $41 million next year, whereas Cam Johnson is owed only $21 million this year and $23 million next season. So the Nuggets freed up a whole bunch of space by sending out salary. That's why they had to include an unprotected first-round pick to do it, because that's a lot of money for the Nets to take on. And they're saying, fine, we're not trying to win right now. We'll take your money. Just think of like the scene from The Ladies' Man. And what about your money? Honey DeLune. Honey DeLune is three thing. So the Nets took on some money. They got a first-round pick as part of it. Cam Johnson, I think, is still a relatively safe top 75 guy with sort of the coasting ability that he'll be able to just sort of do quietly useful stuff all season long. He's not the guy. Like, I don't think I would go get him in the 4th round. I don't even know if I would want him in the 5th, even if that's where I think he ends up being ranked, if only because he's a strong free throw percent guy. But if you see any usage dip for Cam Johnson, it really hurts him a lot because there isn't a downside for usage on Cam Johnson. His turnovers are low. Both of his percentages are either neutral or very good. So, you know, it's not like some of these guys where you take a little usage away and you're like, well, at least their awful field goal percent is less of a problem. Cam Johnson, all of his value is tied up in basically when he gets to shoot the basketball. He can score, hit threes on good percentages, and he does it with low turnovers. He doesn't assist all that well, but like that's a ball in his hand thing as well. If that comes away at all, that's where you could see the possible bottom fall out. And it's hard to see like an uptick, a 1% to 2% field goal potential Nikola Jokic gain helping him enough. So I'm still fine with Cam Johnson. I like the fact that he's now a safe late season play, but to me, he's more of a 6th, 7th round range kind of dude because there isn't much in the way of upside built in. Michael Porter Jr. is a little bit more of a dice roll because he goes to a Nets team where I think he probably does more. And I know that's weird to say because Cam Johnson leaving was taking a lower number of shots per game than what Michael Porter Jr. was doing in Denver. But the Nets also are bad. And if you're saying, all right, well, who's going to take all the shots there? Cam Thomas will probably be back and get to do some. They have, what do they get, like 7 rookies in this draft or something ridiculous. Their press conference had tables just stretched all the way across the podium so that like 19-year-olds could sit down. But it kind of feels like Michael Porter's going to be like, well, if I'm going to be stuck here, I'm going to go buck wild. So I think he's going to do plenty in the time he's allowed to play. A player with a long history of back issues and a massive contract that's not, from an age standpoint, his timeline is not in line with the Brooklyn Nets rebuild. So he's a guy that they are not going to push too hard. They don't want to win a ton of ball games this year. He's a guy I'm sure they're going to be trying to move next season, or maybe we see more of this wave and stretch stuff, which we're going to talk about in a minute on one of the biggest names in the NBA. Meaning I probably don't have the stones to go the Michael Porter Jr. route in Brooklyn. I just I know that he could have a little bit of upside. I know it could be a slightly better fantasy season for him. And he was number 73 this year, which is not bad at all. Like, his numbers were pretty good. And, maybe the free throws are a tiny bit better. It's always sort of hard to know. Maybe as not the third, fourth option, but maybe more of a second option. Perhaps he has so much fun that he plays better for 55 games. But man, I don't know how you draft a guy like Michael Porter Jr. and expect him to finish out the season. So that's the part to me that scares me off of him, on top of all the stuff we've seen with these bad teams lately, where they'll just rest guys from the third week of the year if they need to. So probably not going to draft Michael Porter Jr. I know that, Roto Games Cap, you could take the plunge there, but I think I'd probably have to get him in the 80s, 90s, or deeper, which is probably unlikely, if I'm going to take a shot there. Let's go now to arguably the biggest news in all of free agency so far, but news that has almost no bearing on fantasy basketball, and that's the Damian Lillard in wild breaking news, where, and I'm not going to read this Shams tweet verbatim, because basically Damian Lillard has a couple years left on his deal, and more importantly, he has $113 million left on his deal, which I think is 2 years. Where are we at now? Was it 2 years at like 55-ish mil a year? Something like that. And the Bucks waived him. Waive and stretch. So I get it from just a straight player standpoint. He has 2 years left. He's going to miss all of this coming season, rehabbing a torn Achilles. Who knows what he's going to look like at the beginning of the year after that. And one would assume that the final 2 to 3 months of basketball, like January through April, call it, that would be January of 2027 through April of 2027. The last 3 months, basically, of his current contract is where the Bucks would probably get a... And I don't know what a full bore Damian Lillard is even going to look like at that point after rehabbing Achilles thing. He's not a young dude. He's 2 weeks away from turning 35. So he'll be 36 and a half by the time we think we're getting anything decent out of Damian Lillard. So the Bucks are thinking, what's the point? At that, they're in a spot where if you're Milwaukee, you're thinking the only reason to hang on to Damian Lillard right now is because of his name. Because sitting on him for a year and a half and hoping you get something decent out of him at the end of the 26-27 season and being locked into $55 million for the next 2 years is an impossibly precarious spot. I mean, a lot of teams have had to deal with stuff like this before as superstars get hurt and miss a year. But the Bucks are also in this brutal spot of having Giannis Antetokounmpo looking at all these other teams and going, do these spots look like they're better built to win now and into the future? Where he was already worried about the future of the Bucks because they pretty much mortgaged everything to get Giannis and Dame together, and now Dame's not there. So the Bucks waived Dame. They're going to stretch his contract over 5 years, so they'll be paying him about 22-ish mil a year for the next 5 seasons. But it does open up. It makes the next 2 years more contractually tenable, even if it blasts them in the foot for the 3 years after that, where they're just going to have 22 mil of dead weight on the roster. They do still have 22 mil of dead weight on the roster now, but it's instead of 55. So, in their minds, it's like a plus 33 for the next 2 seasons. And the Bucks have gone to work bringing in other bodies, and we're going to talk about Myles Turner in a second. He's the next name on the board. So that's the way the Bucks are thinking about this, is we don't really care if this is upsetting for anybody that, if it's upsetting to Dame's camp, which, by the way, the initial report, I think Sam Amick put out a piece that was like, Lillard's thrilled about this. He can go anywhere he wants now, and he's already getting paid $110 million. He can go take the veterans minimum if he wants. It's pretty remarkable. If he wants. I'm sure he'd like to tack on a few mil on top of that, but it's giving him a lot of freedom, and it sounds like Dame is not all that mad about it. Chris Haynes reported that Giannis wasn't thrilled with how this was all handled, but I'm sure once he looks at the books and is like, oh, okay, well, good job bringing in Myles Turner. You wouldn't have been able to do that if you had the 55 mil from Dame on the board here. And they brought back Kevin Porter Jr., and they brought back Gary Trent, and I think they brought in Gary Harris, if I'm remembering right, from the Bucks laundry list of things from yesterday. But this is obviously the big one. And it's not going to impact anything this coming season, but it's going to impact a crap ton the following year. Because Dame, he doesn't even have to make a choice for a year. If I'm Dame, I don't do anything right now. Everybody's like, ooh, where's Dame going to go and sit for a season? Doesn't matter. I mean, if somebody gives him a bunch of money to sit for a season, maybe that's the place he goes. But if I'm Dame, I sit for a year because I'm not playing anyway. And he can look at next offseason and say, all right, well, who's got the best spot? The only way that gets broken up is if a team's like, look, we're going to give you a bunch of money to sign a 3-year deal with us, and you can get even more this coming year, and you literally don't have to do anything. We shall see. Next name on the board is Myles Turner, so we're just going to stay in Milwaukee for this one, and then we're going to head west after that with some. I can't wait to go west, but I'm not going to race through Myles Turner because this dude is a really, really, really good basketball player and a really, really interesting fantasy player who now goes to Milwaukee and basically replaces Brook Lopez as a stretch 5 who can block shots but isn't the world's greatest rebounder, but is also significantly younger than Brook Lopez, and should slot pretty much right into what Brook was doing, but also safer. Not to say that Brook wasn't safe, because actually, if you look at the numbers this last year, those two guys were strikingly similar from a fantasy standpoint. Myles Turner and Brook Lopez. Brook actually played more minutes this last year. He played 32 minutes a game, 82 games. Brook was, again, very, very durable despite being ancient now by NBA standards. Myles Turner played 72 games. Brook Lopez, 13 points. Myles Turner, 15.5. Brook, 1.73s. Myles Turner, 2.2. Brook, 5 boards. Myles, 6.5. Both guys were between 1.5 and 2 assists per game. They were both around 0.7 steals. I think Myles Turner was slightly above. Brook Lopez was slightly under. They were both almost right exactly on 2 blocks per game. Brook had the advantage in percentages, but neither one of them took so many shots that it mattered all that much. And at the end of it all, Myles Turner was ranked just ahead of him in 9-cat, and I think a little bit farther ahead if you were playing 8-cat, but neither one of these guys turned the ball over almost at all. We're not going to talk about Brook Lopez on today's show because he's now the backup for the Clippers. That's going to be one of those ones where we kind of zip through it a little. I'm pretty surprised by that decision because it feels like there was probably a team out there that would give him a more reliable 25, 26 minutes, but Brook's going to be a backup to Ivica Zubac. So let's focus on Myles Turner. I'm inclined to believe that the Bucks have seen that Myles Turner's body handles the rigors of an NBA season better when they can keep him in the 29, 30-minute range as opposed to 32, 33. That's not to say that he's not going to have games where he plays 32 to 33 minutes, but I think the target is probably pretty damn close to what he did last year with Indiana. And by the way, that actually probably does help Bobby Portis a little bit, who we talked about on yesterday's show. Big arrow down from yesterday when Bobby Portis was the only center that Milwaukee was going to trot out there. Now they have like 3 or 4, but obviously Myles Turner's the one that's ahead of Bobby in the pecking order. The Giannis domino is still a big one to fall. But I would expect Myles Turner to pretty much replicate what he did in Indiana. Maybe slightly better if Giannis is still there. But I wouldn't bank on it because Indiana had a very unique and sort of clever offense that got Myles plenty of looks and a brilliant pass first point guard in Tyrese Halliburton, who's sadly not there for a year, that he's not going to have in Milwaukee. So, my sort of boring handicap on Myles Turner is that he's probably going to do something relatively similar to what he did last year. And the Brook Lopez closet, like you can just put on Brook Lopez's clothes and walk right in there. You just replace one with the other. And I even think I saw a tweet that was like, Bucks replaced Brook Lopez with Brook Lopez. Yeah, kind of. So Myles Turner belongs in the Jared Allen corridor of drafts. I don't think you move him out of there. Brook Lopez goes way down the board. Bobby Portis falls back into the, darn, I guess it's just not going to be that time. But Myles Turner has new digs, and the Indiana Pacers, for now, a lot can still change, but it sounds like they really don't want to go over any kind of salary cap, especially with Tyrese Halliburton down for the year. So they might rely on younger centers in Indiana. And that is reason for fantasy optimism. I don't want to make any sweeping claims right now because a lot of things can pop up over the net. Like, I'm talking slowly because I still have this weird feeling that like I'm going to be right in the middle of talking about Myles Turner and the Pacers are going to do something. But if you're looking at this coming year, guys on the Pacers that could potentially play center that are actually still signed, it's like, I guess Obi Toppin, who's more of a power forward than a center. And I think Isaiah Jackson is a restricted free agent, or maybe they've extended a qualifying offer. Tony Bradley technically is a center, but that's not something that they're going to want to do. So right now, like, and he might not be back at the very beginning of the year, but right now, I'd be watching Isaiah Jackson very closely in Indiana. Watch closely, and then wait and see what comes next. Let's go to Sacramento. And the less interesting of the two stories out of Sacramento, the Kings have traded Jonas Valanciunas to the Denver Nuggets for Dario Saric. I don't know why I put this one on my board today. This is definitely not one of the top 4 most interesting things that happened. You guys know I've always had a soft spot for JV. This last year was one where we got lucky because I was very much going to draft him on the Wizards if he was going outside the top 105, 110, and then he stopped going late. And so I stopped drafting him, and I ended up with JV nowhere, and he was good only in the games that Alex Sarr missed for the Wizards. Then he got traded to Sacramento, where he was good only in the games that Domantas Sabonis missed. And now he's going to be good only in the games that Nikola Jokic misses. But at least we know definitively that when Jokic sits, JV is going to be a play. Because for a couple of years now, it hasn't been super clear what the Nuggets were going to do on the rare occasion that Jokic needed to sit out a ball game. But he did take 12 games off this last year, and he's starting to put a lot of miles on those legs. So I would assume the Nuggets are, I don't want to say like super careful with Jokic, but don't be surprised if he misses 10 games this coming season. And that means that for 10 games, JV is going to be really, really good because that's just what happens. We've seen DeAndre Jordan still post fantasy value for the Nuggets on days when Jokic is out. Not every time, sometimes. But now it's very clearly JV. He's the backup there. and he's going to be an interesting plug-and-play guy on those rare occasions. Dario Saric, I mean, he goes from not doing much to not doing much. The Kings have a center in Sabonis. They have a power forward in Keegan Murray. Those are the guys of the future. There's going to be some scraps floating around for Saric, who's a relatively versatile player at the very least, but is not at all interesting from a fantasy standpoint, and I don't see him really getting to play all that much. Like how many backup minutes can he squeeze out? Can he get, a dozen at center and like another 5 or 6 at power forward? I don't know. It's still not enough, and not even close to enough. But let's go to the more interesting Kings story, and that is this big deal. $45 million 3-year deal to Dennis Schroder, who we heard rumblings about going to the Kings for like the last week. This is not at all a surprise that this is where Dennis ended up. The surprising part is that the rumblings seem to indicate, I think that was Jake Fisher? I think it was Fisher that was reporting that the Kings might be interested in a sign-and-trade that sent Malik Monk out to bring in Dennis Schroder. Well, that didn't happen. It's just a straight Schroder signing now. And so the Kings, and I was all goosed up about the Keon Ellis year. I thought this was going to be the Keon year. It's not if Schroeder's there and everybody else is also still there. Because they brought in the point guard. They brought in the guy to play alongside whoever of DeMar or Zach LaVine, I guess it's probably LaVine, is the starting shooting guard. Because the Kings had a number of players pretty well locked in. LaVine is locked in. Sabonis is locked in. I'm assuming Keegan Murray and DeMar DeRozan are fairly well locked in, but it sounds like DeMar and Malik Monk are on the trade block. And then it was going to come down to like, oh, well, is it going to be Malik Monk? Are they going to go all offense? Are they going to go defense with Keon Ellis? At the end of the year, it seemed like they had kind of pivoted more towards the defense first approach after trying a lot of Malik Monk in the middle of the year. And now Dennis Schroeder's going to play, and he's probably going to start. I don't know why they would give him $15 million a year for 3 seasons if they weren't planning on starting him. That's not to say that I understand why they're giving him $45 million to begin with. Forget that part of it, because that part doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I know Schroeder's like decent and he's fine, but there's nothing special about him. And the Kings seemed like they really wanted him. They got their guy, man. And their guy was Dennis freaking Schroeder, who takes that last job. So now it's Schroeder, LaVine, DeRozan, Sabonis, and Keegan Murray, unless they move somebody. Monk and DeRozan, as we just mentioned, sound like the 2 guys that are the most likely for the Kings to move, but neither one of them is going to be all that simple. DeMar has 2 years and about $50 million left on his deal. Monk has 2 years and a player option and about $60 million on his deal, 40 guaranteed, and then I would assume he's going to exercise that $22 million at the end. So how, like, that's a hard 3 years, $60 million. That's going to be a hard contract to move for someone who's a decent ball player in Malik Monk, but not like a game changer, not a guy that teams are like, oh, yeah, I definitely want to build my team around that. DeRozan's probably an easier one, if only because there isn't a third year on his thing, and you always know exactly what you're going to get, but anybody that goes out to get DeMar is probably going to be telling him, we want you to be more of a bench gunner, like Malik Monk's role, but not signed for as long. So I don't know exactly how the Kings are going to do it, but they got to open up a spot if we want anyone other than a core 5 to have fantasy value. Because right now, like, LaVine's going to get his shot. Sabonis is going to get his. Keegan's going to do the more like quiet, decent 9-cap production kind of thing. DeMar's a little bit of a question mark. And now Schroeder's going to come in and probably play 30-plus minutes a ball game. But here's the flip side of that. It's not going to be like Schroeder at the beginning of this year of this last season in Brooklyn when he got all the shots he could handle. It's going to be more like Schroeder, like Lakers Schroeder, who played plenty, but didn't get to do a ton of fantasy stuff with it because his fantasy game is not super translatable. He was number 63 over the season's first, 6 weeks or so on 19 points, 6.5 assists, 1.2 steals, and good free throw shooting. It took 34 minutes a game and like basically max usage because Cam Thomas was out for a lot of that as well for Brooklyn for him to get inside the top 70. He was the number one option on that team. On the Kings, a best case scenario is the third option. LaVine and Sabonis are very much going to be handling the basketball ahead of Schroder. Best case is third option. More likely case, if all these other guys are still floating around, is like 4A or 4B. Or like 3A, 3B, and 3C if you want to lump Monk, DeRozan, and Schroder all in kind of the same bucket. What's more likely is Schroder is going to do something better than what you saw in Detroit because he was full-on backup there, but way worse than Brooklyn. And I just, like, in a 9-cat format, I don't know how he gets inside the top 100 in this spot. Because, like, it reminds me a little bit of the Spencer Dinwiddie phenomenon. Schroder is a better foul shooter, so that helps him in that regard. But otherwise, their fantasy numbers are not all that different. Dennis did a good job of hitting threes early this season. I don't know. We'll see if that's a thing that holds nicely year over year. But he's not a guy that I'm targeting in standard 9-cat. He's a guy you could probably target in... I know he had decent steals with Brooklyn, but that's never really been his thing. He's kind of a punt steals guard. Historically, he'd been a little bit more of a punt threes guard, but he made more of those this last year as well. So I don't really know what the proper build is for Schroder, but 13th round... 12th, 13th round. I guess the question becomes, and then we'll wrap this thing up because we're talking a lot about Schroder, and that wasn't necessarily my intent coming into the show, but we're here now, so we're doing it. I think it's going to come down to what you like to do with a 12th round pick. So you have pick 140 or whatever, and Dennis Schroeder's still on the board, which probably won't be the case. Someone's going to take him earlier than that. But let's, for this hypothetical, say he's still out there at pick 140. Do you take him, assuming also, by the way, that the Kings roster is unchanged between now and your fantasy draft, which feels somewhat unlikely, but let's just use it for our situation here. Do you take Schroder at pick 140, knowing full well that you're going to get a guy who caps out at about 115 in 9-cat, but also is probably going to get you in the teens in scoring and 5 assists and 0.8 steals and 1.5 to 2 threes a game on a decent free throw percent? Or do you go mega upside hunting at that same spot? So Schroeder's going to be the relatively safe but super uninspiring floor and ceiling guy going probably in the 11th, 12th round. And I just don't know that makes a ton of sense. Like, I guess if he plays in all 82 games, that ends up being somewhat useful in head-to-head leagues. And so maybe that works. Like, he strikes me as a guy who's going to beat his ADP by totals and lose to it on the per game side. And if we're talking about a player that you draft at like 65, who has a per game rank of 80, but plays in 80 games and has a totals rank of 40, that's a guy I kind of like. For Schroeder, who's probably going to go outside the top 100, that's almost like the false totals win. We call them, I think the term for those guys over the years is a plodder. They just plod along with like top 120 value, which is not good in almost any format, but their totals rank at the end of the year is 75. And so all of a sudden it looks like a great season, but it really didn't help you all that much. Just sort of floated you a little bit. Maybe punt turnovers is going to be the answer. There aren't that many guys that have high 2s in turnovers at the end of drafts, and maybe he ends up somewhere in that range. So that's where I'm at with Schroeder, and that's where I'm at with all the guys on today's show. We're going to be doing this probably all week. Relax, enjoy, more free agent shows to come. I am Dan Bespris for Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please like, rate, and subscribe on your way out. See you again in 24 hours.